All right, I will call this meeting to order. This is a policy committee meeting of the West Bend School District. We've got John Donaldson, Chris Swigert, I'm Joel Ondert. You want to introduce who we have from the school district, please?
Sure. I'm Jen Wimmer, superintendent. This series is related to instruction. So we also have, to my side here is Assistant Superintendent Laura Jackson, as well as Director of Instruction, Dr. Jill Reese, just contributing to the discussion as it relates to instruction.
Great, and the meeting's been properly posted?
Correct, it has.
Great, why don't we all invite you to stand for the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And we are talking about the 300 series today is what we've posted on our agenda, so we'll get right to it. I'll turn it over to you, Superintendent Wimmer.
Thanks. So we started talking about each series. We're in the 300 series. For those following policy at the board level, the committee has advanced the 500 series around personnel. That's in its second reading. And then the committee is working on the 300 series. So for those following along, you can find the information posted in board docs. Right underneath that discussion item, click on that PDF and you can just scroll through and follow along. This evening we have a meeting that follows at 6 o'clock, so generally we go a little bit later. We're gonna do a hard stop and just at 5:30 to allow for the other team to enter, get everything set up. So just be aware of that. So we can dig in as long as we need to on a topic, and again, we'll just pick up that series wherever we might leave off. So looking for a lot of discussion this evening. Without further ado, I'll dig right in.
Okay.
So our first policy to discuss is 330. It's around curriculum development and improvement. Ours is labeled standards aligned goal-based curriculum development. And it talks about just a real general overview around the process for development. One of the pieces that we just went through recently was social studies adoption and getting to really see this policy through that lens. Yep, we're certainly cleaning up. You can see on the text, the second page, there's a typo in there. But really making sure that we have clarity and understanding for not just the team working on it, but also our community. So if we could kind of look through it with that lens and that experience we have. What I've provided for you is also just the sample policy. I didn't reformat or anything. I wanted to give you some WBSD template language that follows. And then I also gave you a sample from my former district where we tried to embed the phases of development a little bit more clearly right in policy. Now our phases would look different. So right now I'm just looking for our discussion, our guidance from a policy perspective, and this is one that we should most likely then kick back to the curriculum committee to look at and review through that lens as well, so that we got that. So just opening the discussion with the team tonight around what you want to see around clarity, what you see around, and again, we've had some residents really invested in the curriculum process and those pieces, and I reached out to some of them to connect as well. Because we take the job of writing policy, not just for our board, but it's also for our community, and we want to make sure it has that clarity. So I reached out for some feedback on that as well.
So seeing as we've gone through some curriculum approval recently, and this is very fresh, I guess I'd start by asking our administration friends, were there items in here that we took a look at and said, you know, it could be clearer, or, oh, there's something here and we think we know what it means, but not sure. Anything that comes to mind from your perspective?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, really understanding process and the sequential piece of that. If that's an expectation around some sequential pieces, that should really be worked in so that we can adequately declare, so where are we in process for adoption? I think that was a piece. Also from your perspective, ladies, any other pieces that we would recommend? I think clear articulation of what the steps are and kind of that order in which they're expected. And we can certainly do an overarching policy and some more kind of process piece through an AR, but I mean, I would recommend that we just get that language together and get it in policy. to clear up any confusion.
I agree.
And I think just in doing that process, adding some consistency in language. In the course overview documents, we use the phrase guides and documents kind of interchangeably, and it should just be consistent. I think that will happen as we go through and add that, the phases in and.
Yeah, I think it should have, not only process, but kind of those expected artifacts, from that as well. And again, this doesn't have the clarity that it could.
Do you like the rewriting what we already have? Do you like the WASB sample, the Mapledale sample? Is there a starting point policy that you want to go off of?
No preference per se. I think you need to have a preamble around the intention. I think that I have a strong understanding of philosophy from the board, which is a clear process that includes significant engagement from students when applicable, our staff, and our community, whether that's family or residents. So I think kind of something that attends to that. And then some process pieces. I think a procedural piece that follows could give some potential timelines and some expectations around communication in it as well. Because I think that's a piece to make sure people are getting access to the information, that we're giving appropriate time for people to engage in the process. Now, there's some unique, not all curriculum are created equal, in that I'm thinking about like an AP piece where the AP board might change something, and that we have to have a little room for expediting something or the flexibility to shift something. Think of the ProStart curriculum we just had for the culinary course. So that came a couple meetings ago, and it was that ProStart changed some of their industry standards. We needed to flex with that and adopt that. When MPTC, a course that we might have in conjunction with them, comes along, how is that handled? I think we have to write kind of our philosophy and commitment as an overarching, and then here are some process pieces, some expected communications and timelines, and then some caveats and examples, perhaps in some detail that might explain that a little bit further. Because otherwise it's gonna let people to wonder, so then, well, what is the process and why is it different for this and not this? And those are just some examples off the tops of our heads around how things are unique. So I think starting with kind of a philosophical piece, understanding the different phases that we would move through, an expected timeline, getting through that, and then a process piece that accompanies policy that's got a little more detail and some examples is the route that I would want to see that.
From my perspective, I think, the existing policy has the elements that are in there, but they're a little bit hidden.
Yeah.
They're a little bit hidden. And so I like the idea of, if there's something we can do, like you described, perhaps to set the expectation through philosophy, but then have something more like, I'm oversimplifying it, a checklist, a set of gates, and who's responsible for what, so that we know going through almost like a checklist, yep, did this, and so that so we don't have to kind of pluck it randomly out of the various sections of the policy. That's a thought.
No, I think that's a really important piece too. Like you said, where are the checkpoints for the board in approval as well? So that's a really clear expectation, because there's approval checkpoints at the standards process, at the resource adoption process, at the curriculum process. There's all these approval points. So I like kind of who's expected to be in that, and then where is the official action needed. And around when official action is needed, around if this is a primary resource and it's used in all our classrooms, that's the expectation. So I like those pieces. I would recommend that we probably mock something up with kind of policy perspective on it and kick it back to the newly designed curriculum committee to have them take a look at it. Like I said, I've had some community people really highly engaged in offering some perspective. So I'd like to include that as well and get some test readers around that before we bring it back to this group.
Are some of the gates time bound, that they have to be done by July 1st or August 1st or by the beginning of the school year? Or does it just depend on where you're at in
No.
any given process?
Yep, so for curriculum development in that cycle, what we do annually, so it's best practice, one, it's required by statute that we have to give annual notice of the standards that we're using. So we do that annually. Then also we bring a curriculum review cycle before the board. It goes through committee that says which ones are gonna be looked at this year, where are each one at. We've been working on just figuring out where each one is sitting right now so people could see that perspective. So the board approves that annually, like, okay, these are the ones that are gonna be looked at and brought forward for formal review. So there's those checkpoints too, but that's something that's just best practice to do, but I think it would behoove us to get it in policy that comes before the board as a piece of development as well.
I think the clearer that we can state this so that it doesn't matter if you're a member of the administration, the teaching staff, board, public, parent, that we can see, oh, here's where we are in the process, here's what still is yet to come. And so, with that lens in mind, that would be my thought. That's always great to have that kind of vision, and then you get into the nitty gritty, like things like you said around, well, AP might be different than that, but if we could at least start from that perspective, I think that might be a good place to start.
And from a transparency perspective, I think a complementary piece on the teaching and learning website is to kind of list where each one is in that cycle of review. What are the steps? If you look at my former district's policy, we laid out, evaluation, development, implementation, assessment, and refinement were our phases, but then we laid out what does that mean to us exactly? Because that could be a lot of educational speak. So what does that mean and where is that? So I think having that live dashboard too, not just the annual plan, but then so people could look at it, because maybe they're interested in, maybe, I'm a retired science professor and I love and want to contribute to science stuff, like, oh, let me look, okay, that's a year out, I know to kind of look for that then, or I've got these ideas to share. So like I said, it just helps with the engagement piece, which is something we're really trying to expand here. Go ahead, John.
Does this evaluation include teachers? And how they're implementing the curriculum?
Yep, so you'd look at outcomes, you'd look at, is the resource meeting their needs, their perspectives, how they're implementing those kinds of pieces would come into play. So you might have, let's say, there's new curriculum and we're gonna kind of know that, it's gonna take a couple of years to fully implement. And so we might be benchmarking and going, okay, in the first year, we're gonna be doing X, Y, and Z. And we have some checks and balances on that when you're evaluating. Did we meet those goals? Have we attended to that? Is that instructional in place solidly? Do we need more work? Where are we at? That's part of the evaluation.
And so that would in turn, I guess, that would be under the teacher's evaluation of how their students are progressing as well.
So if you're talking about their evaluation, so a teacher's evaluation is in a separate portal. They have to have goals specifically around student outcomes, as well as their own professional practice. And then there's domains around their instruction and following district expectations. So there's checks and balances on expectations that are in their individual evaluations as well.
Separate policy.
Yep, separate.
Yeah, I think that answers, that would have answered my question, just to understand where's the division between this is around curriculum development, and then there's the teachers implementing and applying the curriculum.
Expectation.
Right, because that latter part would be in a different policy, but I think what you're saying is it may be as part of development that maybe the initial phases or trying things out might still be in development, but point being, wherever that dividing line is, we just want to be clear.
I think that's good and something for us to bring forward, and I'll be the one to kind of carry it through the curriculum on behalf of policy, talking about the expectations and making sure that we've got even just a complimentary one-liner around that it's our expectation that this is kind of what you follow and what you do. And again, knowing that something might be unique and that we might be looking at a multi-year implementation, that they're meeting those expectations. We would have to put that together in a manner in which they can achieve those outcomes. Yeah, please.
So I'm looking at like the WASB policy, our policy, Maplevale, and then just knowing kind of what's in the AR.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a number of different things that mean the same thing. I think you were saying that, Chris, but also then just knowing when we walk away with this, we sort of have this list of deliverables, so to speak. So if we have to deliver something to the board, we know kind of that checklist or what that is, because I think right now there's a mix of different things. And if you look at the different policies, each has sort of a different list.
Mm-hmm.
So what do we want that list of things to be, and what do we want to be the things that the board wants to approve, or things that we just inform the board about, or things like that. So I would just ask that we kind of get to that granular level, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, more of a, that's what I had in mind too, around more of a checklist deliverables, so we know was this achieved, was it not achieved?
Yeah, I think we can put that together in something pretty, kind of expected process, expected timeline, the communications, what the artifacts are and what those checkpoints are. I think kind of based on that, we can draft something and then take that into curriculum committee, share this perspective around what we're looking for and let them wrestle it around a little bit and then bring it back to this team to do, so.
Yeah, I just know with interest that when you look at the history of this on the very first page, it talks about the prior revised dates.
Yeah.
So 75, 80, 84, 07, 13, and 2017. And so this is the collective wisdom of many, many years.
Generations.
And, right, and yet here we are saying, we think it needs to be tweaked again. But I think it's evidence that this particular topic, the curriculum development, kind of ebbs and flows with time and what the community's needs and expectations are. Because otherwise, my gosh, this has been, reviewed by 6 school boards.
Exactly.
So, but I think this is worthy of reorganization and clarification.
Perfect, so that's the route that we'll take, is kind of take these initial sentiments. If you have any other thoughts, feel free to share them with me. I'll get that scheduled on curriculum committee and do some of that due diligence, like I said, with some good critical friends in the community that'll kind of read that and give me some perspective from that, and then we bring it forward through curriculum. I would anticipate probably a couple discussions, and then come back into this committee before it goes forward to the board again. And I'll bring forward the drafts. When we do those, I'll bring them forth simultaneously at curriculum as well as here, so we can just kind of continue to commingle and collaborate on that dialogue. So then, like I said, if you've got any other perspectives and as you think about that, let me know, because we'll see that on a couple of future agendas. Thank you. The next one is actually 345.1. We have it really refined and labeled as grade point average, when actually it's a little bit more comprehensive around overall grading systems and expectations. So ours really hones in on one little aspect of grading, but grading is a little bit more comprehensive. So I know that I had included, again, former district, we had done some work around grading, and then I gave you the WBSD sample. I think it's, grading is something that we do, grading and reporting. It's for students and families to understand a child's progress towards goals. And I think that we're missing kind of the district philosophy around overall grading. It's great to have grade point in here, but I think we need some overarching expectations around grading. How often do we grade? Right now, we're grading at semesters and then doing interim progress reports. Do we want to codify that in policy? Do we, we went from trimester to semester and things like that. So, what are those pieces? I'd like to see those in policy, but we also have to have a philosophical discussion around exactly what this says, which is grade point average and the concept of weighted grades. So that can sometimes be an interesting, controversial topic. Laura, you're going to know more clearly because you're engaged in the discussion most recently. This was just vetted in 2020. But again, I look for a little something more comprehensive around grading, and then I just want to resurface the discussion around weighted grades. Weighted grades are when you're taking advanced coursework at the high school, and those kind of have some accelerated points that get factored into your GPA. Laura, if you can kind of give us the history of the last team's discussion the philosophy of that, and maybe, I know you've checked on some neighbors, if you just want to talk about that a little bit, so that it gives us the background, so that we can pick up that conversation.
When we,
You can take mine.
thank you.
Yep.
When we reviewed this last time, the policy committee talked and discussed, the current policy was specifically around grade point average. And we determined to leave it specifically around that and address the high school physical education classes. They were not at that time factored into the GPA. So FIAD was not part of the GPA, and we had discussions with our physical education department and the outcomes of that. I believe that revision had happened in 2014. I don't recall the last time the district had weighted grades, but we did decide at that time not to venture into that. We talked about the possibility of looking at some cum laude designations for the fact that we have students, and you saw it at the board meeting this week, that excel in career technical education classes, really achieving to high levels. One of our students having earned a degree from Fox Valley Tech while attending high school. I mean, that's significant. That would never show up on a weighted GPA thing. So we talked at that time about needing an opportunity to dig deeper in a more bigger process, so that we're considering not only those high academic courses and honors courses, but also that component and those who are really achieving those industry standards in tech ed, and how we would recognize that.
The discussion from 2 years ago is starting to ring a bell on not only the grading system, but what's to follow as class rank. And I still have a belief of asking the question, well, what do colleges want? Because class rank, back in my day, was extremely important when you were looking for college. Are you number one in your class? Are you top 5%, top 10%? Obviously, GPA plays a role in that. I do agree the way that the policy reads now is pretty much a high school policy because it's GPA. But how do we grade in elementary school, middle school, intermediate school? That's missing, clearly.
Right. And there's some, we'll get to a little piece that talks about credits that you can obtain as a 7th and 8th grader.
Right.
And how does or doesn't that factor in. I'm gonna go back to the implications for grading in post-high school world. So every school is different. When I can recall, I was a director of instruction once in my former life, and we went all around to UW system as well as other private colleges and campuses, and talked with admissions around that. Because like you said, there's meaningful things of what do or don't they mean. They were talking about in their experience the discrepancy in grading systems in all districts, that an A might mean one thing for us, and it might mean another thing for Kewaskum. It might be, there's some nuances to grading, the scales you use, all of those pieces. So instead of that, in admissions, they're looking for access to rigorous coursework. Have they taken any advanced classes, things like that? They know and understand our schools and kind of where high caliber, pieces are coming from. So they know to take that and look at a transcript a little bit more closely around what are the courses they're taking, are they passing those courses? And I know West Bend is known as, having high achievers and kids like that. They're looking at other pieces of the student's portfolio in their ACT, their, other experiences that they're contributing. So they're looking at a little bit more well-rounded, and they use and leverage their knowledge of school districts and systems versus a GPA of 3.75, they know does not mean the same thing across systems, that it's not an apples to apples piece.
One other component we talked about when we started reviewing the policy, so while the date of the last revision was the 27th of April, we would have started that policy review several months before that. And I believe it was shortly before we started meeting on this that Mr. Schlass and I had met with representatives from Wisconsin colleges and universities. And one of the things we asked about was that class rank. And so you may recall as part of the discussion, Joel, when the universities within their schools look at some honors programs within their schools, they specifically take the students who were in the whatever, 5%, top 5% of their school. And that's, that is based on how we designate class rank on their transcript. So it'll say like 3 of 400 or 2 of 25. And so we talked about the designating that rank on the transcript and the implications of that for students.
So that's gonna move into a different policy. So this one is around kind of those grading systems. And like I said, I think we need to beef up our philosophy of purpose of grading, our expectations for grading. And then we need to have a conversation around, do we want to kick over a rock on weighted grades being back? So, because currently our practice is
We don't wait
that we don't weight anything. Do you know what the immediate neighbors do?
I don't recall.
I'd have to check. We can do some checking into neighbors. Geographically, we could also maybe look in, a lot of times our comparables, we look at the athletic conference. And then,
This is my daughter who is joining us, and you can sit there and read or do your homework. And
I thought maybe you wanted to join a policy.
Watch, or come with us. My wife is out of the country at the moment, so she's walked across the street.
I could also add ACT
Yeah.
to that mix, because colleges do look at ACT scores, colleges and universities do look at ACT, sometimes PSAT, but in this area, really ACT scores, and that's part of the
Sure.
full planning process also.
So would this team, like I said, we can certainly look at maybe just the expansion of a preamble around the purpose of grading and our intent to when we're reporting progress, those kind of pieces to add. Keep this around grade point specifically, because I think it's an important piece. People are wondering about that. Do you want to leave that lie as is? Because I know it was recently discussed, or would you like us to vet the region, see where they're at, and then ask the curriculum committee to look at and have a philosophical discussion regarding weighted grades again?
Looking at the sample policy, which for me is on page 11, absolutely, we need to beef up learning targets, clear for students. Parents and guardians are frequently involved. All of that does need to be in this policy, in my opinion. As it relates to a weighted GPA, I get so torn on this because I interviewed a kid last year for a scholarship. The question was, if there was one thing you could change about the West Bend School District, what would it be? And he said, weighted grades. I took every single advanced placement, advanced course that you guys offer, and I got a couple of B's along the way, and I'm ranked number 34 in my class, and I'm not the valedictorian, yet the kid clearly was one of the smartest kids in his class. Versus Chris Swigert, who didn't take any advanced classes, who didn't take any AP courses, he gets all A's, he's the valedictorian, he's number 1 in his class. I mean,
Exactly.
It is exactly that.
And I think to Joel's point that, that's a pride thing too for the kids, they get to see the achievement that they've done and actually see the extra work, because I know my daughter she's in advanced classes and they're much harder than all of us. So it's like they should be able to be rewarded for, I think, the work that they put into those classes, because I mean they're advancing their school career, with college credit classes, right in high school. So it's
I think there's appetite to enter into that discussion again. I think what I'd like to do is kind of get that preamble set through committee around larger philosophy around grading. Let us do that digging into work, do just an updated check-in with admissions. Again, they're seeing that, but like you said, a pride thing for our students around that sense of accomplishment and honoring that. we'll scout the region, look at what the neighbors are doing and across kind of what other pieces look like and what practice looks like. I think that we should bring that forward for the full board to discuss and perhaps give some guidance. If we need some pieces then to get refined through curriculum committee or through policy, that's fine, but I think it's a real big philosophical
It
discussion
is,
for us to figure out where the board is at, to help us proceed. But we will, for that discussion, bring all those elements, some pros and cons, for that, and then certainly you can speak to some of the historical pieces, but.
I think for me, I'm not necessarily looking to talk to colleges and universities. I agree. They're looking at ACT scores, transcripts to see who's taken those courses and things. I'd be curious what the neighboring communities are doing and just talking to our current senior class.
Okay.
You know, we've got a kid who's going to Harvard next year.
Yeah,
And we've got a,
so
you
it's
know,
not harming.
well, we got another, I'm sure we got dozens of kids who are going to Milwaukee and Madison and lacrosse. And did any kid not get accepted to a school because their GPA or their class rank, for instance, wasn't high enough?
Sure.
Or, you know, the GPA was 3.8, but it could have been a 5.2 or.
Right.
I'm just, I guess, curious, is it affecting our current?
Sure.
Is it affecting our kids?
Okay.
And maybe it's not, and if it's not, then I guess we don't need a weighted. The recognition is nice at graduation to be a valedictorian or salutatorian or a number one in the class, but if it's not having an effect on the kids, then maybe we leave it the way it is.
I'm gonna go through just with the time, that we've got access to our seniors and those pieces. I think I might go through student council and their representatives to gather some feedback from theirs, if that would be okay. At least then I could get some immediate, like you said, from these pieces. And then we could also look more comprehensively at looking at, those who are juniors or something of that nature. But like you said, to get the perspective of students, who this is directly impacting.
And Paulie would be good, talking
Yeah.
about scholarship applications and where some good kids overlooked because they had some A's and B's, but they were taking all advanced classes or not, so anyway.
Like you said, that
So-
honor piece of what they've really accomplished and how we really, is our system helping them to do that? All right, so then what I'm gonna do on that, go ahead.
Isaac. If we're changing this to grading system,
Mhm.
will we have, the different grading systems broken out in here? Or,
So what I recommend, generally is that you have an overarching piece and then the supplementary grading piece gives you the different, like, here's what it would look like, here's what reporting looks like. So you want us to have that ready for that conversation?
I just know because the lower schools have, they grade by numbers.
Yep,
They don't grade by
exactly.
A, B, C,
Yeah. Perfect.
So I was just curious to that point to, what
Yeah.
to do with that.
And then I think there's always that fear, I think, a good point, I hear high school people all the time, they're like, are you gonna take away grades, are we gonna have to do what they do? I'm like, no. You're still gonna get A's and B's and C's, but I think to your point, John, a complimentary piece around what does grading mean, that's something that we've worked on, what those expectations are, for ourselves as staff, but also what families can expect. Because, grading and reporting, that's for them, and if we're turning up something that they don't understand when you look at the report card as an artifact, then what's the point on that? So I know we've done some feedback, with some stuff around, like, is this really communicating? We had some focus groups with parents at Silverbrook talking about, like, a lot of topics, and that was certainly one of them, and how could we engage them in helping refine, like you said, the artifact that's a product of grading. So that sounds like a plan, like I said, that's kind of a big rock on the weighted grades. So we'll do a little bit of work, and then Chris and I will plan to put that on a full board agenda for everyone to kind of talk about, weigh in, and give a little bit more guidance for the work ahead. And then determine if it needs to go back to kind of both committees, curriculum and policy, or how we want to do that. Does that seem like a good plan? Perfect, thank you. And then another one of those pieces, like we said, a little bit connected following that is, we have a valedictorian and salutatorian. It's the class rank policy. I gave both, we've got it really identifying how the valedictorian and salutatorian are selected, and eligibility. And then I just included, a sample class rank on that piece to make sure you had some perspective. Because this seemed a little bit more designed specifically for West Bend. So I just wanted to make sure we were looking at both of those.
So valedictorian does have to be an honors diploma, at least 9 classes as advanced honors. So we do have that in there. So you can't take all basic classes, get all A's and be valedictorian.
Correct. Without the weighting, you've got it sitting here around eligibility to be named valedictorian.
Okay.
Remind me the reason for paragraph 4, which is the 10th day. Does that have to do with the day that you count enrollment? I'm fuzzy on that.
I don't know the history specifically. You would count enrollment on the 3rd Friday.
That's what I thought this meant, but that's not it. Okay.
I don't know, Laura, if you've got some history.
What's that all about?
You know what? Well, you know what's really, it's continuously following the 10th school day of your junior year. It's to keep someone from transferring in. Someone could transfer into our district right now, today, 6 days from the end of the year. So it's to keep someone from hopping districts to up their own placement.
Sure.
With that piece, I guess, I mean, it's nice to see that they take into account the advanced placement courses and stuff like that. But if a student was to come in to try to sweep away a valedictorian position that comes from a weighted school with a higher GPA, do we re-situate their grades to our standards at that point? Because that would only kind of be fair.
So we do take the class, we do take the courses from another district and include that in the GPA. And I believe that when it's put into our system, an A is worth 4 points, not 4.5.
It
So
comes into
will
ours.
be
So it
weighted
would-
as ours are.
It's kind of like a college where they would take in, read the transcript, determine if we're honoring the course, but it would get translated into our points. So there'd be that recalculation at that time.
So what do you think on this policy? Does it need to be reworked, or do you like that it's?
So I think it provides some clarity regarding the eligibility. It gives you, like I said, without the concept of weighting, it is giving priority to the more rigorous coursework. It talks about and has kind of that continuous enrollment or reading transcripts from, alternate countries, that kind of thing, and making sure we're looking at that specifically. The only thing that it didn't really speak to, and when you talk about in the grading, was the pass-fail, and how those are transcripted or looked at in there, which is in the sample policy. So in that, pass and fail is not considered in that. It doesn't contribute plus or minus to that ranking.
And you're correct, that's not listed in this policy, but that is our pass-fail does not have, it's our guidelines that we follow, and I believe that's how it's described in the course planning guide at the high school, but that's not reflected in the board policy. So pass-fail does not have an influence, it doesn't count in your GPA. And if you recall, in the spring semester of 2020, we allowed our high school students to choose, well, their parents, to choose if they were going to be pass-fail or graded for that spring semester of 2020 when we were shut down. So it affects all students rather than some.
So I think that's the only language I would look at adding to this, that we have a little bit more clarity around that selection around a pass-fail course. But other than that, these are, they're good to have in place to understand eligibility in case it's contested around that. And we have declaration of a valedictorian and a salutatorian. The only other piece that we do not have in here is a definition of what those mean to us.
Pass-fail?
Valedictorian and
Oh.
salutatorian. What does that mean? And what do you get for that? So it's, I think we just need to say that if people aren't understanding valedictorian is, the highest ranking, salutatorian is your kind of runner up from those
You
pieces.
want a definition. of
Yeah,
what
we just
they
need
are.
to say what those are a little bit more clearly. And can you have more than one valedictorian and salutatorian? And can you have, it's, you want to write a policy that helps you make a decision and helps you have a strong foundation for your decision. So I'm not clear when I read the policy around pass fail and how many is that? So can I have 5 valedictorians at a school?
I would say if there's equal GPAs, then why wouldn't you?
Exactly, but then, or is there some kind of next tiebreaker? Is there something? I can't read this policy and untangle this. So-
Yeah, I guess that I would definitely suggest, putting an explanation of, and standard to
Mhm.
who would be a valedictorian if it was the highest GPA. Any other student with exact GPA is also considered valedictorian at that point or something like that,
We've
Obviously, Chris
had
can do the legal
multiples.
side of it.
We've had
There's
multiple.
S's in parentheses.
There are.
Yeah.
Yes.
So just understanding with those factors, we won't go to a tiebreaker or something like that. We would consider, all things being equal, right? Because in some, whether it's scholarships or some other opportunities, it gives you kind of, and then the tiebreaker would be this, and then the tiebreaker would be this, until you kind of winnow it down to one. So we are okay with, like you said, if they've earned that recognition and validation, then so be it. All things being equal, you can have more than one.
Or would the tiebreaker be the student that took or more of the AP classes? Because that would be
We do
a,
have a tiebreaker listed for Wisconsin scholarships.
Mhm.
And that's part of it is, the honors class is taken and the advanced placement class is taken. And, so there are steps in that, and we've had to go to multiple steps because we've had kids at the same GPA level.
Do you want us to grab those existing rules and bring that to this committee to look at, to determine if that's, like you said, we set a floor on what they need to be considered. But like you said, we might at face value that once that floor is set, you might have 2 valedictorians, but this one still took more of the advance, the way this is written. So is that the intent, or do we want to dig a little bit deeper? That's the philosophical piece to ask here.
I think the more that we can, I know it adds more detail, but the more questions that we can consider, it'll help resolve these situations before you have some folks who really work really hard, and parents and kids that work really hard having an argument over, I want to get into Yale, I want to get into Harvard, this is really important, I'm going to press this. For the avoidance of doubt, the more that we can
Right.
clarify, I think the better, so it's done in advance.
And I think that I like the philosophy of, I don't need to winnow it to one, right? I don't need to be that big of a gatekeeper, but how to get to honor it. I think it might be good because they are vying for that selection at those, so it might be prudent for us to have the principals engagement with a discussion with, take your top 20 kids and talk about this. Because they're the ones vying for it or looking at it, what is it, what do you think in that perspective? Again, these are high school kids, they certainly know what they're going after, they're chasing, I think their perspective is really valid here.
yeah, and I think those extra pieces in there could actually be a motivational piece for the student, to see when they start their college or their high school career, to see, I need to make sure that I have more AP classes than the next person, because I'm a runner-up with this other person that is probably gonna beat me out if I don't. So, I think kids know enough, if they're in class with enough, and some of them take it pretty serious how hard they're gonna push themselves. So
Okay.
I think it's a good thing.
So look at it a little bit closer around, like I said, not just setting that floor for those Ps, but maybe kind of, how we would winnow that, but again, not wanting to be a gatekeeper on it, and then really talk about some perspectives, some kids who are really kind of pushing that, calculating it, going for it, what that does or doesn't, and then add some language around pass fail.
The sample policy, which I'm on page 14, I think, in
Yep.
paragraph 4, talks about courses that students might have taken at private schools and home-based private educational program. Now, ours is silent. The existing language is silent on that. Go ahead.
It
It
is
looks like
silent,
you've got
but
it.
it specifically says that courses taken at another district, it might be in the GPA one. From another district, I think it's in the GPA one, excuse me. Let me scroll back up. Transcripts will be reviewed for students who transfer to West Bend high schools from a high school outside the West Bend School District. Any credits transferred from another district will be factored into the student's GPA.
Oh, I see. So the idea is if homeschooling might have been involved, well, that's not a high school outside of the West Bend district, nor is it a credit transferred from another district, so it wouldn't be included. Is that the intent? You see where I'm going
I'm
with
with
this?
you around, I think it's
It
silent.
has to be clarified.
You
Yeah,
benefit from clarification on that.
I
That's
think
an
so
important
too.
factor.
Yeah, it's like you said, it's implied, but it's not so stated. I think that should be added. And then I think that these,
One more piece that I would suggest adding in, we talked about pass-fail. I would suggest retakes, because there's definition in the course planning guide around retakes. And that's part of that whittling down
You take a class
factor.
over.
yeah,
If you take a class over, your higher grade will count in your GPA. But if you're taking the same class over to get a higher grade, that wouldn't allow you to be considered for balance out.
yeah, can you riddle me this?
Interesting.
And we'll get to it in some of the acceleration. So can I take the course during the year? Am I allowed to take that class for a second time if I passed it in
Yes.
summer school?
If you're looking for a higher grade, you are able to retake it even if you passed. That
You
is
pass it
also-
with a C, and you want to take it for a higher
So you
grade.
could take a condensed version and up your grade point? Now, I
Now,
think that's something we should talk about.
Up your grade, but there's not a time, it's not designated that it couldn't be during summer school. So I
There's no
would say
timeframe on it.
we probably have that opportunity.
and I guess I would just ask, so why aren't they eligible to be valedictorian then with that? Because if the student has the bandwidth in their, in their schedule to retake a class that they think, I think I could do better at this. I mean, I guess I would just say, why can't we just average student grades? If you're gonna retake it, you have to know that we're gonna average it. If you get worse, then your grade point could go lower. Like, is it a
I
possibility?
think the average is really.
It's a straight replacement, but I like the potential of averaging the two.
But I'm just saying, if you, in order to still maintain the status or the eligibility to be valedictorian, you have to know going into it, if I'm gonna take this again and I got a B in it, and I wanna try to get an A, then I might not get a 3 or if I get a C, then you go to a 2.5 or something average.
I think I have to look at the system, I have no idea about our system, just literally the tech system capability for doing that and tracking that, or if that's always a manual override.
You know what I think is an interesting concept, I think there's a unique difference between taking it over during the school year for the full semester versus a condensed version in summer school. And it would be interesting to look at some of our summer school numbers, to look at how many are really doing that. Because summer school is designed for accelerated credit recovery in those pieces. And that would just be interesting to see the numbers of how many students are really doing that. I think it's different taking the course. They're rigorous in summer, don't get me wrong. They're looking at the hours, the intention, and they're accountable for, hitting proficiency in there. But that's an interesting piece on there.
It is interesting and worthy of additional thought, because the last thing I want to do is discourage people from taking classes.
Yeah.
And because, well, if I take this, I would like to get better, but it doesn't really make a difference, versus.
Yeah,
No,
like
I
John
wanna
was
do this
saying,
to truly
honor the
better.
challenge,
Exactly.
let kids rise to it, and then just making sure our system isn't, it's still's got a really high bar on that and playing that. So it might be interesting to look at some numbers flush those out, and get that, and then going back and making sure there's alignment between kind of that GPA and that expectation, for the ranking and what they mean.
There is a line in 345.1 that says courses that are audited or taken as pass fail will not factor into the GPA. So is that then adding something additional to the next one? Is that what you're speaking about?
So, no, that's a separate concept. I was talking about pass fail earlier,
Okay,
but now I'm talking about straight retake of the
Okay.
class. So they're taking it for a grade. They're not
Right,
taking it the
right,
second time around just to get the pass or fail. They're looking at replacing grades, no different than we did in college, you know, where you could retake something and it's a straight replacement on your transcript. So I think it'd just be interesting to look at some maybe historical numbers out of summer school, look at some pieces on that and make sure we've got them doubly stated, like you said, kind of the homeschooling piece and what those mean. I think we've got some other pieces well articulated, but
Who knew there would be such robust discussion over something as
that's why I said
simple
tonight,
as
a lot of
GPA.
philosophical discussions around these pieces.
We have homework.
But some good pieces, yes, homework. 345.3 is homework. And it really talks about, it was recently updated in 2020. We don't have any recommendations on it. Just take a look through your lens. You know, you're understanding what homework is, what its purpose is, and kind of when we accept that.
I remember this one from a couple of years ago. I don't know if we had it in there or if we were considering it, but kind of a guideline that elementary school kids shouldn't have more than 30 minutes and middle school shouldn't have more. And we decided either to take it out or not put it in. I can't remember.
It was in, we took it out.
It was in, we took it out, because it just could be, there's so many variables. I mean, you could do homework a lot faster than me, or what if a teacher says, this is a big project, it's gonna take 60 minutes, and a parent says, well, you're breaking policy, the policy says 30 minutes, you know?
Right.
So,
There's some guidelines in student handbooks that helps parents know those differing expectations, so that they have a general sense. Maybe it's a first child going through, maybe there's nuances, and because you're helping them really, you know, make decisions at home. Like you said, you might have a student who's struggling to the point of it takes longer. There might be some kind of modification on homework, things of that nature, some differences. So yeah, like you said, you want to have that flexibility, but that is good to share that guideline with families so that they understand and feel like they can reach out to those teachers in the nuances of homework. Things happen, you know, families might have something that's going on. Just always reach out to teachers and like, hey, you know, we've had this big family event, this kind of thing, like, can we work with you on this? And then our teachers are really understanding.
do you think we should even have a homework policy?
Yep, I sure do.
Okay.
I'll just
yeah.
I'll just add, so there's a piece that's kind of, I think, a little bland. It says developmental, homework assignments will be developmental appropriate.
Mhm.
Now, that doesn't, if I was to just read that, right now I understand it as if my kid's in third grade, they're gonna get third grade level homework. But what if that student's not up to the third grade standard and they need something else? That doesn't play it out, I don't think, for me.
Let's get you a little bit more, because also inversely, it means I have a third grader who reads as a sixth grader. I don't put sixth grade material, I might put that reading level, but some of the things, you know, if you've got an accelerated child, it has to be developmentally appropriate, that it's not inappropriate for their age. So to your point, some teeth around that, a little more understanding around what that means to be developmentally
I think it's
appropriate.
beneficial.
Yeah, it's around, like you said, exposure. Okay.
That's good.
Any other pieces around that? Like I said, I think it's a nice understanding of purpose. Knows we'll get some language around what developmentally appropriate means together for review. Anything else on that one?
Not for me.
Okay.
Good.
The next policy, 345.4, is on promotion, placement, and retention. It is super super long. And it's covering a lot of things in one. I wasn't clear, just from an organizational point on it. I don't think it points to placement very well. Just as if I were trying to skim through this and read this, the way that's titled, I would want to see placement a little bit.
What do you
more
mean by
clearly.
placement?
What grade you get placed in. So here's how this happens.
New student comes in.
New student, maybe from another country.
Transfers
Yep, another country. They might follow different academic schedules. So there's very specific countries, that they have different academic years, and they might say, but my kid passed this, but age-wise, developmentally wise, it actually matches up over here. A lot of, you'll see this quite a bit, most often when I would have to get engaged in conversations, I'm sure this never happens in this system, but I call it red shirt in kindergarten. And they want to sit out and like say, okay, yep, no, we're gonna start this time. So there's different points of entry, and we'll get to that, there's around that, but a lot of times it's, you're a building principal and you're reading a transcript and you're looking at something, and maybe, one system has got different expectations around retention, around that, and all of a sudden I'm looking at a child who was retained 2 times, they're 3 years older than their classmates, and, I might look at this and go, there's something else at play learning-wise, and, we would place that student appropriately. So there's different times when you're placing, but it gives the authority to the principal to understand, work with a family, and do placement, and that placement ultimately resides with the district. If I got a student in, and I once had the experience, not here at all, as a middle school teacher, where they wanted to place a 16-year-old in 8th grade. No, not appropriate at all. Placement resides with me, I have that authority, no, and we need to do some alternate things. So has it happened here? No, not at all, but you just want to make sure your policy is making it clear on those weird kind of one-off cases. And like I said, I just organizationally couldn't read that and find that just really clearly stated. So I would recommend putting something around the principal, and then giving some avenue for families, like, okay, and if you don't agree with that, here's your next conversation kind of thing.
So that's placement, which is kind of the initial, where it's gonna go. And promotion would be,
Promotion is when
Next.
you get to go to the next grade.
Yep.
And you want to have some pieces clearly laid around expectations. You don't want students just getting rolled forward without skills. But you also don't want retention based on what I feel. A lot of times I would have families that I was working with as a teacher, I want my child retained based on, well, they're immature, socially immature. I'm like, hey, I can point to some 40-year-olds who are immature. So there's a lot of process. Your school psychologists actually work with families and staff regarding retention, promotion, making sure that, did we miss anything? If you've got a child struggling in school to the point of retention, which isn't always a good intervention, that's just a reaction. Did we miss an intervention point? Have we missed a disability area? Have we looked at, there's some really inherent process laid out around that, kind of those pieces and what those are, and just on behalf of kids, what we're gonna make sure and do so that we're serving them. If they're struggling, retention isn't the only thing in our toolkit. Like, it's not okay to just retain someone. What do we need to do to wrap around and get a student's skills? What do we need to do on those pieces? There's a separate policy around acceleration. So this is just around the placement, promotion, and retention. So again, the language is there, and that was updated. I don't know if you want to speak to the last time you had the discussion.
So one of the things that was updated, so I agree with what you said about placement. I would say at somewhere in our policy committee to provide guidance for placement from homeschooling.
Sure.
And particularly, how are we awarding credits when parents sign up to homeschool, there are certain requirements they should be doing that they can provide us with information upon enrolling their student into our schools. Some provide incredibly detailed information, and some have nothing to provide. And so that brings decisions forward from this, about where the student can be placed. Our grade classification chart on there, I think needs some updating, but for the history component of this, we previously had been only if a student finished grade 9 and was credit deficient, we kept them as a 9th grader and adjusted their grad year. And so they could be a 9th grader 3 years in a row. What was happening then, the students never stayed tested as a 10th grader or as an 11th grader on the ACT. And they're also not showing as credit deficient because they're listed now as a 9th.
In the grade that they're,
Correct.
yeah.
So we had to make that adjustment and identify that students are considered grade deficient or credit deficient, excuse me. But we need to we've changed our graduation credit requirements since this policy was updated, so that should
good.
So are we taking the placement portion out of this?
No, I'm saying
Yeah.
placement isn't clearly,
It's not, but we.
So that's what you're saying, it's only promotion and retention?
yeah, like it needs to have a heading around, what does placement mean? Because it's in here and I think it's worthy of it, but it feels missing to me.
So with that point, to your point, you were mentioning about age, are we gonna define that then? As far as an age range that's appropriate for each grade to be placed, with other students?
We can do that.
I mean, if you're saying it's inappropriate for a 16-year-old to be in 8th grade, if it's not a policy, how do we define that? Besides always,
The policy says we're the final decision.
Right.
On that.
One of the things that we, a student can legally attend, who is a regular education student, can legally attend school up through their 20th year. Like they hit 21, done. So if you've been retained twice, and that 16-year-old entering 8th grade is never going to have a chance to graduate high school.
Right.
And those are some things you need to consider when you're placing a student.
So you would want to keep those, like you said, and shame on whatever system a child would come from. That is not what we do in West Bend in any way. But you write policies to kind of cover and give you that authority in case you have that one off. Because we would then remove that child, let's say we, have a 16-year-old gets with that, we would be removing them to some alternative programming, wrapping around that child, working on getting the skills, generally it's reading skills, back up to speed, doing some remediation there and getting them a pathway to accelerate some credits or some placement, or we've got a rich lineup of some alternative programming so that we're not placed in that situation.
so you believe you're covered under this either way? As
Yeah,
far
I think, like you said, I don't necessarily have I wouldn't necessarily need to lock myself into an age. You are gonna have students with disabilities who
Sure.
stay in school to age 21, and do something, different things, so they might, so I wouldn't wanna lock us in policy-wise. What we could do though, to your point, is work with our principals around, hey, when you're looking at this, because they're taking point on that, do you have a shared understanding that we've got good, solid foundation so that they're executing that policy?
Or would you create an AR?
Yeah, like I said, more of a procedural manual of you and your secretary, when you're looking at a transcript, a lot of times it's at that elementary level specifically, where you're looking at that, making a decision, and then when do you kind of call into student services going, hey, I need help on this one, more of a procedural manual piece. So we can put that together too, so we can look at it, but I think that's worthy.
I'm smiling because I remember the movie Billy Madison, remember? He goes back and takes. Adam Sandler, he's starting first grade.
My father would tell
All
you
that
that he had someone who did not graduate with them, and she got on the bus with her first grader, and she went to school, and they allowed her to go back and finish. You have the authority to do it. I would have in my other system, people like, you know what, I was one credit shy. And they come back, and how do you generally work with a technical college and help honor that and help people get that diploma, it's meaningful, and but there's a lot of different pathways now to get that.
So I'm looking for us, it's page 17, it's what you're holding in your hand.
Yep.
You have written down promotion and retention, but it sounds like we need to come back on some dialogue related to placement.
Yeah, so, yeah, I think I would just reorganize a little bit to call out placement, a little bit more specifically in there, update those pieces around some of those charts. Again, really just understanding philosophy, and then maybe make a process piece around what's really nice, steps that the district have taken is central registration. So we have a registrar, so instead of, 9 different buildings taking in records and figuring that out, we have Carol who's right here, one point person, and she knows when she has unique situations, go right into student services and untangle some records and figure out those pieces. So that is a step that the district's taken that really helps in this, instead of kind of 20 different end users trying to interpret.
Okay.
Really helpful.
I see there's state statute on
Mhm.
placement of children affected by military transfer, placement in gifted and talented, so, okay,
Yeah.
we'll come back to that one once we get some
Yeah.
placement and,
Yeah, like I said, a lot of philosophy
Yeah.
tonight, guidance. That next one is on acceleration. So talking about honoring advanced learners, talking about acceleration. When you are a middle school student and maybe you're accelerated, you're taking high school equivalent courses during your middle school, there's that connection to the other policy in AR. We need to clean up that alignment, but when does that count? And the credits count towards graduation, but then where does the GPA go? The GPA doesn't factor in, but they can accumulate credits for their transcript. So you're kind of untangling students who are accelerated there. We talk about acceleration requests because, people look at, and we have criteria for understanding gifted learners, acceleration, and different criteria for different subjects. And then anyone can make that referral. So whether you're the parent, whether you're the teacher, a lot of times you have a parent, a lot of times it's in the early years around like, hey, is my child gifted? Or they'll again reach out and work with our team. There might be doing some outside evaluations, assessments to really unpack that a little bit and saying, are we seeing something that we've got to be aware of and differentiate in the classroom, and then put in, some gifted and talented services. Is this a true acceleration of a whole grade? There's some other policy around early entrance, but I think this unpacks nicely what if I'm an 8th grader taking high school level credits, that you're accumulating credits, the GPA factor. So not any recommendations for change here, just looking at updating it. It should actually be 345.41, not 4A.
Makes sense. Just as a quick matter of background, I think you addressed part or maybe all of it, sorry, and
That's
I
okay.
didn't catch it. There's a difference, correct, between the concept of acceleration and gifted and talented. That may not necessarily be the same. I
Correct.
think where we talked about this back in 2020 or whatever it was, if I remember right.
And the
Just
concept of
refresh
early
that.
entrance too. Early entrance will come in the next series of the 400 policies around when you enter school. So that's a factor too. But it's really trying to call out that, anyone, parent, legal guardian, anyone can refer, ask questions about, look at acceleration. Our staff certainly make recommendations that our students have access and that we can help support that through some assessment and kind of reading and unpacking that. So there's access, opportunity through any avenue, parent referral, et cetera. And again, really laying out nicely, you can start accumulating those high school credits if you're qualifying for the coursework. But then again, when you're a younger student, you don't start your GPA until you hit the high school, but then be honored by your transcript. Which lends itself to, like John was saying before, if they're starting earlier in those, then they're gonna have more access to higher level, like more AP classes, things like that. They're gonna go through our system and start college now, all of those pieces. They're gonna keep expanding. We've got a good array of courses for students who start earlier. And then we have plenty who do, and that's great to have that. Any other questions on that? Physical education, the half credit exemption, this would actually be numbered as 345.64. And this is looking at, this was probably a really big topic in 2018 when it was first adopted. A lot of districts did this. And it's laying out criteria for eligibility of this. when they can do that. It was recently revised in 2020. Just looking at it, we don't have any recommendations specifically. Does it make sense for you as a reader? But it's giving students options that other pieces could supplant that half credit physical education so that it would be exempt.
So you can get a waiver, just the opening sentence, I want to make sure it's clear. I can get a waiver to participate in sports or in another organized physical activity as determined by the school board to complete an additional half credit in English.
Yep, so you apply for, if you're in sports, you might say, you know, I'm working for this, I wanna also take this English elective.
Okay.
And in order to make that fit in my schedule, I'm asking you to consider my varsity soccer semester as my Phi Ed, so that it opens up the opportunity for me to take this class.
And look at, you're laying out that it's so they can open up flexibility in their schedule to take additional English, social studies, math, science, health in lieu of that. So it's creating, it's honoring physical activity in those pieces. A lot of kids are dual sport athletes, things like that. So there's a process for application to accept that so that they can open up their schedule for one of these other pieces.
In that application, they identify the course that they would like to take to replace that Phi Ed credit.
Why do we need an application? Why can't we just allow the students to gain credit for physical education? We have some very good athletes.
Mhm.
I mean, if they're still, obviously they're in multiple sports a year. Why do we need to have an application for them to be exempt from physical education? I think if you're taking sports on a regular basis in the school, that is their physical education.
You want it documented. You want it documented and signed off as part of that process so that you're waiving that officially on that transcript. So I get what you're saying, where we should make sure that our athletes who are doing that are aware of that. And is there a way to alleviate kind of one more piece of paper or make sure the kids are in attention to that? I can talk with the athletic directors
Yeah, and I would
around
say
how they're talking with kids around that.
maybe put it on the coaches to announce, hey, does anybody wanna get their credits through this and skip physical education class?
It's part of that accountability, and so just speaking to how it's been implemented in the system, you have to have taken your first 2 credits of Phi Ed, so you have to have completed those. There's a state requirement that identifies that when Phi Ed should be taken, that it spreads out over 3 years. That you don't take all your Phi Ed credits that count towards graduation. You can take as much Phi Ed as you want for electives, but the 3 credits that count for graduation have to be spread out over 3 years. And then you have to complete the sport before to replace that. So
Makes sense.
those pieces, that's part of that check and balance, so that someone doesn't come later and say, and realizing they didn't take Phi Ed, which shouldn't be the case because you're working with your counselor, but you should, so it shouldn't be the case. But you're trying to do it right.
But I think to John's point, he's making sure that kids have that understanding, promotion, and that the application is easy. It's just signing off and declaring course. But every student who's gonna participate in a sport, they have to go through at the high school level, those athletic meetings, fall or spring athletic meetings. I'll talk to the ADs around that. A lot of our athletes too, they might supplant a summer PE, take it then, it gives them that, and it's giving them strength and conditioning in their off season in a meaningful way too. So I'll talk with the ADs around what that notification looks like and how we reinforce that.
And I guess,
Sign off.
yeah, and my biggest point is, how busy the students are. If we can, if they want to be in sports, I think we should encourage the sports, build team building and everything else, working with the team and everything, and just to be able to have that option and they know about it, to say, hey, I can actually do the sport instead of having all this extra homework.
Yeah.
It kind of just might encourage.
Well, and it gives them, like I said, high school athletics has changed a lot. It's been a long time since I've been in high school. But, I mean, those are, as you're saying, honored that those are rigorous practices, those are every night. If they can even free up a little bit of time in their schedule, in any way, this is saying they can't supplement, like, I can't just have study halls, you know, it's, like you said, we have a lot of academic athletes. So I'll look into the promotion of that, how that's done at those spring, fall sport meetings. Also, I'll check in with our counselors around how they're making sure that they're identifying that, because we do categorize kids in all the activities they're in, so they should be seeing that, and making that application. So I'll do a little double checking, on that, but as far as language, outside of the number, I think we're.
Remind me again, that half credit for FIED does count towards your GPA or does not?
The half credit FIED does now count for your GPA.
Does count, okay.
now count for your
Because I was just thinking back to this valedictorian and whatever, or grade point average. I guess grade point average won't matter, but you don't have an advantage by taking a half credit of English or that half credit of PE. They're the same.
Correct, they're the same.
Okay.
Yeah, a child may have different reasons for wanting to waive that FIED credit. And to be honest, our form actually lists the sports that we have that qualify for this.
The WIA.
Okay.
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
We'll do a little checking just for that promotion piece and maybe get some stats just because it's of interest, how many are taking advantage of this, because it is something relatively new. So while, again, no recommendations on the language, we'll just do a little background on that so I can report on that in the future.
Is a semester-long class a half a credit?
Correct. And classes like algebra it's a half credit each semester. But a class like FIED is a semester long.
How about give me an English, social studies, math, science
So
example?
mythology is a semester long course, so that's a half
Okay.
credit, but English 3 is a year long, so
Okay.
each semester is a half credit. The class itself is 1 credit.
The next talks about academic achievement, specifically graduation requirements, 345.6. There was a lot of, I'll lean on probably Joel and Laura as the historians, because at one time, I think in the most recent adoptions, at one time we were a little bit less than what the.
We still are, we still have credit less.
Yeah, so let's talk about that a little bit. So you want to talk about that history that, less than the state?
You can see we've increased our requirements in over several years. So in 17 and 20, we increased the graduation requirements. We are still below the state recommended. The state recommends 23 and a half credits for graduation, and our most recent update, we stayed at 23. We didn't go to 23 and a half. We have a 7-period day. So if students took a full load every day, 7 period, that would be 28 credits. If they took 6 classes each year, each semester, that would be a total of 24 credits. So, but we're currently half a credit behind what the state recommends as the graduation requirement, based on the number of required courses and the number of elective opportunities they encourage.
So the things too, so you think, well, what are kids backfilling that scheduling, right? Their dance card is not full at all. So what do they do and how is that calculated? So students might be going to work. In a lot of cases, youth apprenticeship and those pieces also are associated with credits.
Correct.
So they're garnering credits for that. There wouldn't be any credits associated with a study hall at all. So they might be, I mean, that's almost more than one study hall a day in that. So they might be using it as release and actually just, they've looked at other work options or, you know, really doing that. They're either using it for a study hall or maybe some kind of release for themselves. They might be going off to their job or starting their day at some point. But it's, like I said, kind of that room for their, So they got a little room on that dance card.
Yeah.
And what do we want to do? We went up incrementally. I can only imagine the conversations were around the complexity of kids' schedules and the increasing kind of weight of responsibility of high school, the exposure to a lot more rigorous coursework, balancing perhaps family work, friends, and a sport. Kids who are doing a sport at the high school level in season are practicing every single night, sometimes weekends. So having that opportunity to have, you know, some flexibility in their schedule to give them periods of study, to do that, to look at access to their teachers during study hall for academic supports. Our teachers at the high school teach, and then they also do a period where they're accessible to students. They might be supervising some of those study halls, but they're accessible to kids to go get some structured support as well. But again, we just really wanted to make sure that you're knowing and okay with that the state recommends higher than what we have currently.
So that's only one more class and one more semester.
One period for a semester.
One period for a semester,
Would give us up to the state standards.
correct?
I mean,
Over 4 years. High school.
right, I mean, I guess, you know, I guess why wouldn't we be at the standards?
We talk about what does that
I
say?
feel bad for my kids, but, you
Right.
know. what do you-
I'm for sure calling home and be like, guess what your dad just said? They're like, why did dad run for board? But no, again, I don't know the history of the conversation, but I think there was a lot of discussion even to get us to this point. And I'm not sure of the why, but for me, what message does that send around? I just don't want it perceived as West Bend's okay with lowering the bar. I'm not meeting the state minimum right now, and how is that okay for us? And again, could be a lot of complexity behind the history of that conversation around the whys, but
You mean as to why we, would we- if
why
we
were
br-
we okay with it being lower?
If we bring it, well, I mean,
I don't know why.
at this point, if we don't fix it, how is it any better than staying at a lower standards and not holding ourselves to a better standard?
I think one, to at least be at that minimum, but I think the other piece you have to be aware of is you'll have people start shopping for a district, maybe they're credit deficient, and then they come to us because, well, I could get out sooner, or I could do this, and, there's comprehensive choice for families, which I fully support, but sometimes they come shopping to us for the wrong reason, in that, that bar's a little lower there.
Yeah.
Selection.
And
So-
the district had a method for trying to address that at one point, but it was not through a board adopted procedure, so we eliminated that.
And I'm assuming we went incrementally because you can't expect somebody to gain a whole extra credit in their last 2 years, because that would
Right,
overload them.
you wanna just say, so, I mean, I think it's mindful, if there's appetite for this group, to look at that and at least increasing that, then again, you'd start it with, okay, then this year's freshman class
Right.
would be accountable over that for the next 4 years, right?
I was thinking the same thing because, let's see, those entering high school would be graduating in 26, is that right? 23, 4, 5, 6, yeah. And maybe we could do a staggered implementation of the same thing, say, all right, this affects freshmen going forward.
Right.
Excuse me.
And if you look at the progression on the bottom, it's already, the 23 doesn't even go into place until 2024, the students that will graduate in 2024, so.
This year's class and next year's, the bar is 22 and a half.
Right.
How many credits? So I'm gonna go back to this year's senior class.
You wanna take a look at how
Yeah,
many
how
that
many
we're
are they,
graduating
how many are most of them graduating with? Are they,
Maybe we're there.
are they shooting for 22 and a half? And then that's it? Or do most of them get 24? Or whatever?
And I know we looked at that last time we did the policy, but I didn't compare that for this conversation.
Sure,
okay.
that's okay, but I'd be curious, what's this year's class on average?
Sure,
It's a good point.
any of those bids.
Because we looked at the.
And then, do they get, is there any kind of reward for going over the recommended credit amount? for the
You
students
get
or-
the reward of having all this experience.
Sure.
To know what.
No, John, the
So,
answer is no.
so if kids are taking it, it's for themselves.
Their own drive, beefing up their own transcripts.
Yeah.
Yep, and they do, and they might come through and accelerate, it's like, great, I met all of that, and now I can,
And I've looked at this and this, and I've taken all these.
Yeah. I'll work with the high school counseling team to look at some data.
I
Around
understand
this.
that there are kids in our community who certainly take advantage of leaving the building and going to work.
Mhm.
And that needs to be weighed.
And also, but, we try and find those opportunities where those kids are actually garnering credit
Right.
through different, they're not just going off to work, but we're understanding, working with them through different, helping them garner some of that employment, so.
We had a superintendent years and years ago who I know was big on graduating early, start college now, juniors and seniors being able to start college credits while they're still in high school. I don't know if that played a factor into this over the years.
What's interesting is, like I said, without looking at that, like, we might have low-class kids who are already meeting this, and we have an artificially low bar for no reason.
Sure.
Because, there are all those pathways, there are those opportunities, we encourage that, it's great for our kids to kind of save time and money and graduate out with those pieces. So they might already be doing and taking advantage of the coursework, and like I said, this might just be an artificially low bar.
My son's is in 8th grade and he's already got 1 credit. He's got Spanish.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I don't believe it's a hardship. I wouldn't, and certainly I can grab the data from the area school districts and that. I mean, it's not unheard of to see a requirement of 25 credits for a high school. So I'll grab you that perspective as well as some of the data, but I'm with you, we need to look at up in this.
But we do outline, gaining credit outside of school, because I do think that's important. I think
Yep.
Unfortunately, you do have kids that are supporting and helping their family.
Mhm.
And, being able to work and not have a huge load and be able to gain credit still is, is kind of a.
And we work with those students, I'll get you some numbers on who's taking advantage, but we try and honor that if they're working and figure out a pathway into apprenticeship or, to honor that work and that experience. I'll get some data around that and we'll look at what that would look like to mindfully put that in, from that perspective, so thank you for that.
What would that fall under as far as credits then? If, outside of the school credits that they gain?
So it depends, you wanna take that one?
They're typically under elective credits, awarded for graduation, but, they're electives, not meeting one of those other specific requirements.
So I'll get you some data around those different pathways, because I think that would be interesting for perspective on that. With that, I just want to be mindful of the time, it's 5:29. A lot of really good deep discussion on those. I just know that there's another team that's gonna
Let's
get
take a
ready.
look at page 28 really quick. It has to do with the civics assessment.
Well, let's close the loop, like you said on that. I gave you a sample policy around graduation from WBSD. Why don't you take a look at that as we kind of vetted our philosophy? Take some time to look at this and say, and you can reach out to me, hey, let's look at these parts, but this will certainly come back to this committee for discussion. Are there some pieces that help provide clarity or flesh something out in here that we like? And then this is interesting, the civics assessment is a requirement, and I think it should just fold in as a really clear requirement with graduation and not be sitting separate out on its own. That would be my recommendation, that we more clearly state, this is a requirement of graduation for our students. So I would include that right in that policy, right in as part of that chart, like here's another piece that you need to be attending to.
So it's only one-stop shopping, so to speak, for someone who's looking for graduation requirements.
Exactly, like I read that whole policy and I didn't realize I was accountable for that, like where's that? So that would be my recommendation on that piece. But take a look then, and you can see in graduation policy, WBSD's got it right embedded in there. In that, so take some time to look at and think about, are there elements of this that you'd like to see folded in? Feel free to reach out kind of individually
around that, so you've got some time to process. And then we'll bring back to this team a draft of a more comprehensive graduation and what it looks like to implement Raise That Bar a little bit over time, what that language would look like. And we'll bring back some of that data around what our current students are doing. I'll do a look back, just in case, you know, generally I look at 3 years of data, but, you know, those years that were disrupted, might not be valid points. I'll just double check and see maybe what my current juniors are on track for. So maybe this year's seniors and next year's juniors to be a little bit more accurate in that data collection.
Just quick, would it be beneficial to reference, I know there's a policy regarding volunteer hours and designation that you get if you have 100 volunteer hours?
Oh, to talk about those.
Well, because it kind of goes along with this, I mean, I don't know if you do that, do you reference those within a different policy?
Why don't I take, I think our counselors are the ones, because meeting with students and families, why don't I take some of their tools that look at kind of what are all those other requirements outside of the coursework and make sure our policy is speaking to those more comprehensively.
Or would that be under the designation, the valedictorian stuff?
Yeah, let me,
I'm just saying, because they get
Is
the.
listed in the course planning guide, but not in board policy.
yeah,
Oh, okay.
but let's look at kind of putting that,
Because I know it
Together.
specifically states a designation that you get if you have over 100 hours,
yeah,
so. it
like you
just-
said, let's look at that piece and, perfect, we'll give that a look and see where that best fits. So with that said, that kind of closes the loop on that piece. The next one, that I'll just call your attention to was still just a smidge connected to that topic, which was around 7th and 8th grade students taking courses for high school credit. That's the technical name of that policy, and it's 345.65. It's an actual policy on that, and it really spells that out. So I would recommend we either make it an appropriately titled and numbered policy, so it's a little bit more clear. Right now, it's an AR, and it talked like, I would gloss right over this as a parent or a student, high school grade point average at middle school. Like, okay, the title, I think, fits 7th and 8th grade students taking courses for high school credit. Then I can lay out the credit and the implication for GPA in this as its own policy appropriately numbered. And then make sure that intersection is clear in all the other policies, the graduation, the valedictorian, all of that, but it's. Sound good? Awesome.
Good discussion.
I think that kind of closes the loop on a big topic. We'll pick up the next time around that, but we've got some good input and some work. We'll bring these back with that data and those pieces. Again, that one policy that we talked about more bringing to the full board, and the one kicking back to curriculum with our sentiments, I'll do sooner rather than later, so we can get that. With that said, Mr. Chair, I would recommend that we end in a timely fashion this evening to allow for the next committee.
Go ahead. That's all right.
I want to go back on one thing. Can I do this?
Yeah.
Or should I wait till next time?
No, we can.
I have a note here.
Yeah.
It's 345.3.
Okay, yep, got it, homework.
What page is that? Let me find it in here.
Here, let me bring mine, I've got handy right
It was number 5. So if a student does not complete or submit homework due to the excused absence for school, student shall be able to provide opportunity to complete work. Okay, that wasn't it. There was, where's the part where they can do the redos? Because I know students do a lot of
Is it at
redos.
the bottom of that?
I thought that may have been it, but actually it's not actually in, maybe it's not even in here. So I know students do retakes.
You're talking about assessment or homework?
Homework.
Retakes on so they're redoing homework, so an opportunity to resubmit homework?
Or redo it if you got a bad grade or
Gotcha,
missed it.
okay,
I guess, so maybe it's not in here, maybe I misunderstood that or read that too quick the first time. Because that's excused absence which, you know, I don't wanna mess with that, but I know with the retakes and stuff like that, I don't think, maybe we don't have a standard. I think there's too many retakes, honestly. I don't remember ever being able to retake stuff. You know, and being, just because you didn't want to study and do the research or the, you know, due diligence to do the assignment correct the first time. I just think, you know, we're we're giving a false hope for, achievement for these kids, down the future, like, oh, you can't reduce stuff all the time like that. I mean,
Gotcha.
well, I just don't know what we're setting with that kind of precedence and what kind of,
Let's dig in,
standard.
there's two pieces to that puzzle. And maybe in some of the grading, we take that on, like you said, do I get full credit for that? Do I not? If they're gonna redo something and correct it, is that the expectation? But there's a difference between resubmitting your homework or retaking an assessment.
And I believe right now they get full credit.
Yeah, so let's look into that a little bit. I'll see what implications there are for homework, but maybe that might be a grading practice piece too, and we get at both homework and assessment in that. So let me do a little work, talk about what current practice is, because that might look different for different grades. And as you said, what's the expectation and what's the credit? Because, if I got a student who's going to show that and say like, I'm dedicated, I want to resubmit, I want to do this, and do the practice part that's leading up to the assessment, and we do that, like, that's great, but there's a nuance to the assessment versus the homework too.
I just
Dig
think
into that.
we're opening up the opportunity for them to basically breeze right through it and not really try, and let me just see if I can pass it. And if I don't, then I'm just I'll just retake it and I'll try next time. I don't think it gives them the kind of the will to actually
Right.
do the homework and
When
do it
does that
the right way
opportunity
the first
exist
time.
and why?
Right.
And what are the implications for their actual grade or performance?
And, I don't think every assignment should be eligible to be retaken. I mean, I think it should be under teacher's discretion if, a student had a rough week or something happened, they're
Sure.
out back, whatever. Yeah, get a rough week, I think you should be able to retake that, whatever.
Okay.
But, I just,
Let's look at that in both places. I think the overarching grading piece as well as homework. Because it's got implication for assessment as well as homework. So we'll talk about that and bring that forward.
And I think the active learning, because the assignments are not all the same, right? So if you're learning how to do
Yeah, they're usually
like a
rated
certain
really
kind of
small.
Julian cut or whatever, right? So redoing it is that demonstration of, okay, now I can do this, right?
Yeah.
So it's not going to be the same course to course necessarily.
Yeah. But that'll be different developmentally and the weighting of that implication. So the discussion will bring some of those pieces back for this. Like I said, that's a fun series to jump into. But with that said, I'm going to kind of make a recommendation. We pause for the evening.
Move to adjourn.
Okay,
Any objections? We are adjourned.
all right.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you.